Business is not about kindness. It never was. While you're taught that success comes from innovation, hard work, and fair competition, the real architects of corporate empires know a darker truth. Business is war disguised as commerce. 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli wrote the definitive manual on acquiring and maintaining power. Today, his principles govern every boardroom decision, every hostile takeover, every mass layoff executed with surgical precision. The corporate princes of our era don't just read The Prince, they embody it. From Silicon Valley to Wall Street, from Amazon's warehouses to Apple's ivory towers, Machiavellian laws shape every transaction that touches your life. The question isn't whether these laws exist. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize them before they consume you. This is the anatomy of modern corporate power through the eyes of history's most ruthless political philosopher. The birth of the corporate Medici Florence, 1434. Cosimo de' Medici returns from exile, not with armies, but with something far more dangerous: financial leverage over every major family in the city. The Medici Bank didn't just lend money, it created dependencies. Debtors became allies, allies became vassals, and vassals ensured that challenging Medici power meant financial suicide. Cosimo understood the first law of enduring dominance: control the resources others need to survive, and you control their choices. This wasn't charity disguised as business. This was power architecture disguised as banking. Jeff Bezos studied this blueprint with obsessive precision. Amazon didn't start as the everything store. It started as a systematic campaign to control the infrastructure of commerce itself. While competitors focused on profit margins, Bezos focused on market dependencies. He sold books below cost until bookstores died. He offered free shipping until customers forgot how to buy locally. He built Amazon Web Services until competitors had to pay him to compete against him. Every customer-friendly innovation was actually a Medici-style trap, benefits so compelling they created inescapable reliance. The genius of both Cosimo and Bezos wasn't in their products. It was in their understanding of human psychology. People don't choose convenience over freedom consciously. They trade freedom for convenience gradually, one small concession at a time, until they wake up in a world where alternatives no longer exist. Prime membership isn't a loyalty program. It's a psychological anchor that makes shopping anywhere else feel like financial loss. The Medici Bank made Florence prosperous while ensuring it could never be free. Amazon makes shopping convenient while ensuring retail competition can never recover. But here's where modern corporate princes surpass their Renaissance predecessors. They've learned to make dependency feel like empowerment. Cosimo's subjects knew they were vassals. Amazon customers believe they're making independent choices in a free market. This evolution in power management brings us to the second principle that separates corporate princes from mere businessmen: the Venetian strategy of invisible conquest. Venice, 1400s. While other Italian city-states conquered through armies, Venice conquered through commerce. Venetian merchants didn't destroy competitors, they made competitors irrelevant. They controlled shipping routes, banking systems, and trade relationships so completely that rivals found themselves reduced to middlemen in their own territories. Constantinople, Alexandria, London, all became nodes in a Venetian network that appeared mutually beneficial, but was actually a carefully constructed empire of economic dependence. Mark Zuckerberg is the digital doge of Venice. Facebook didn't kill MySpace, Friendster, or other social networks through superior features. It killed them through network effects that made resistance futile. Every friend who joined Facebook made staying on competing platforms less valuable. Every photo shared, every event organized, every business page created strengthened Facebook's gravitational pull until leaving meant social exile. Zuckerberg understood that in network-based businesses, the winner doesn't just take all. The winner makes alternatives meaningless. The Venetian model requires patience that borders on the pathological. Merchants would spend decades building relationships, accepting lower profits, appearing subservient to local rulers while gradually becoming indispensable. Facebook operated at a loss for years, giving away services that cost millions to maintain, building infrastructure that competitors couldn't match. When Facebook finally monetized through advertising, users weren't customers anymore. They were products being sold to advertisers who had become dependent on Facebook's targeting capabilities. Google perfected this strategy through search monopoly. Like Venice, controlling Mediterranean trade routes, Google controls information pathways. 92% of global searches flow through Google's algorithms, which means Google decides what information exists in practical terms. Businesses pay Google to be found by customers Google delivers. Advertisers pay Google to reach audiences Google defines. Governments negotiate with Google to avoid having their information censored. It's not a search engine, it's a digital empire that makes the Venetian commercial network look primitive by comparison. The terrifying efficiency of the Venetian strategy is that victims participate in their own subjugation willingly, even enthusiastically. Medieval merchants celebrated when Venetian ships arrived. Modern users celebrate when Google launches new services or Facebook adds new features. They don't realize they're celebrating the tightening of chains until escape becomes impossible. Which brings us to the third law that governs corporate principalities, the Borgia method of elegant brutality. Rome, 1503. Cesare Borgia doesn't just eliminate enemies, he eliminates them in ways that terrify potential future enemies while maintaining plausible deniability. When rivals threaten his control of the Papal States, Borgia invites them to negotiate at Senigallia. He welcomes them as honored guests, provides magnificent hospitality, and murders them all in a single night. The message spreads throughout Italy. Borgia's friendship is as dangerous as his enmity, and resistance is futile. Machiavelli witnesses this and calls it perfectly executed. Steve Jobs imported Borgia's methodology to Silicon Valley with modifications for modern sensibilities. When the iPhone threatened to cannibalize iPod sales, Jobs didn't hesitate. He destroyed Apple's own profitable product line to maintain market control. When rivals like BlackBerry and Nokia dominated smartphones, Jobs didn't compete incrementally. He redefined what smartphones meant, making their advantages irrelevant overnight. When internal executives questioned his vision, he didn't argue with them. He eliminated them from decision-making processes so completely that opposing Jobs became career suicide within Apple. The elegance of corporate Borgia tactics lies in their public justification. Cesare claimed his murders were necessary for peace and stability. Jobs claimed his brutal management style was necessary for innovation and excellence. Both were telling the truth from a certain perspective. Their methods did achieve their stated goals, but both also understood that fear is more reliable than love, that eliminating threats permanently is more efficient than negotiating with them repeatedly. Tim Cook refined this approach when he took control of Apple after Jobs' death. Instead of dramatic public executions, Cook uses supply chain warfare. When suppliers displease Apple, they don't get angry phone calls. They get contract terminations that bankrupt companies overnight. When competitors like Samsung both partner with and compete against Apple, Cook systematically reduces dependency while increasing Samsung's reliance on Apple business, creating a relationship where Samsung succeeds only when Apple permits it. Modern corporate princes have learned to execute Borgia-style elimination with legal precision and public relations cover that medieval rulers never imagined. Mass layoffs are right-sizing. Supply chain punishment is optimization. Market manipulation is disruption. The bodies are buried in quarterly reports and SEC filings, but the message is identical. Challenge the prince at your own peril. This evolution in power projection leads us to the fourth principle, The Machiavellian Art of Manufactured Loyalty, Milan, 1494. Ludovico Sforza faces rebellion from his own subjects who question his legitimacy as duke. Instead of suppressing dissent through force, Sforza creates external threats that make his protection appear necessary. He invites French armies to invade Italy, knowing they'll threaten Milan's independence, then positions himself as Milan's defender against the foreign threat he secretly enabled. His subjects rally around him not from love, but from manufactured necessity. It's psychological warfare disguised as patriotic leadership. Elon Musk has mastered this technique through strategic controversy and crisis manufacturing. When Tesla faces production problems, Musk creates media spectacles that distract attention while generating fierce loyalty from customers who feel they're supporting a visionary under attack by traditional industries. When SpaceX encounters technical failures, Musk frames them as necessary steps toward making humanity a multiplanetary species, transforming setbacks into evidence of ambitious leadership. His Twitter controversies aren't personality flaws. They're loyalty tests that separate devoted followers from casual observers. The genius of manufactured loyalty is that it creates emotional investment that transcends rational evaluation. Sforza's subjects supported him even when his policies harmed their interests, because questioning Sforza meant questioning their own judgment and identity. Tesla customers defend the company against criticism even when their own cars have quality problems, because criticizing Tesla means admitting they made expensive mistakes. The prince becomes inseparable from the follower's self-concept. Amazon generates manufactured loyalty through Prime membership psychology. Once customers pay the annual fee, every non-Amazon purchase feels like financial loss. But Amazon goes deeper. It creates artificial scarcity through limited time offers and lightning deals that make customers feel smart for buying things they didn't need. Bezos understood that true loyalty isn't emotional. It's financial and psychological dependency disguised as consumer choice. Apple perfected manufactured loyalty through ecosystem lock-in, presented as premium experience. Once users invest in multiple Apple devices, apps and services, switching platforms means abandoning sunk costs and relearning workflows. But Apple frames this dependency as sophistication. Customers don't feel trapped, they feel enlightened. The most effective chains are those that prisoners mistake for jewelry. This brings us to perhaps the most sophisticated tool in the corporate prince's arsenal, the Renaissance art of information control, Florence, 1497. Girolamo Savonarola controls Florence not through military force, but through information management. He determines what books are read, what sermons are heard, what ideas are discussed in public spaces. Citizens who disagree with Savonarola don't just face punishment. They face social isolation because their friends and family have been systematically fed information that makes dissent appear immoral or insane. Savonarola doesn't suppress opposing ideas. He makes them literally unthinkable by controlling the information environment. Google has achieved information control that medieval princes could never imagine. Through search algorithms, YouTube recommendations, and Gmail filtering, Google shapes what information billions of people encounter daily. When Google changes its search algorithm, websites disappear from public consciousness overnight. When YouTube modifies its recommendation system, entire categories of content lose their audiences. When Gmail updates its spam filters, business communications simply vanish. Google doesn't censor information. It shapes what information seems relevant, credible, or worth attention. The sophistication of modern information control lies in its appearance of neutrality and user choice. Savonarola's control was obvious, and therefore generated resistance. Google's control feels like personalized service because algorithms appear to give users exactly what they want. But what users want has been shaped by previous algorithmic exposures, creating feedback loops where Google simultaneously responds to and creates user preferences. It's behavioral conditioning disguised as customer service. Meta's Facebook and Instagram have refined information control through emotional manipulation, masquerading as social connection. The newsfeed algorithm doesn't show users what happened. It shows users what generates engagement, which usually means content that triggers strong emotional responses. Outrage, fear, envy, and validation. Addiction drive more engagement than information or genuine social connection. Zuckerberg has created the first system in human history that can manipulate the emotional states of billions of people simultaneously while making them believe they're freely choosing their experiences. TikTok represents the culmination of information control evolution, an algorithm that shapes attention spans, cultural values, and political opinions through entertainment that users consume voluntarily and enthusiastically. Users don't feel manipulated, they feel entertained. Parents don't recognize the danger because the manipulation appears as harmless fun. Governments struggle to regulate TikTok because traditional concepts of propaganda assume coercion. But TikTok's influence operates through addiction, disguised as enjoyment. This evolution in control mechanisms brings us to the sixth principle, the economics of systematic dependency creation, Genoa, 1340s. The Bank of St. George doesn't just lend money to governments. It gradually takes over governmental functions. When city-states can't repay loans, the bank accepts tax collection rights as collateral. When they still can't pay, the bank assumes administrative responsibilities. Eventually, the Bank of St. George governs territories across the Mediterranean while maintaining the fiction that local rulers remain in control. Its conquest through debt, disguised as financial assistance. Amazon Web Services has become the Bank of St. George of the digital economy. When startups need cloud infrastructure, AWS provides services below cost to gain market share. As these companies grow dependent on AWS architecture, switching becomes prohibitively expensive. When they achieve success, they find themselves paying Amazon for the infrastructure that enables them to compete against Amazon in other markets. Netflix pays AWS to stream content that competes with Amazon Prime. Spotify pays AWS to deliver music that competes with Amazon Music. It's systematic dependency creation, disguised as technological service. The Bank of St. George model requires patience and capital reserves that competitors can't match. Medieval banks could operate at losses for decades because they understood that controlling infrastructure eventually generates monopoly profits. AWS lost money for years while building technical capabilities and customer dependencies that are now nearly impossible to replicate. When companies finally try to migrate away from AWS, they discover that their entire technical architecture assumes AWS services, making independence economically irrational. Microsoft achieved systematic dependency through Office Suite ubiquity that created professional skill dependencies. Workers trained on Microsoft Office become unemployable without Microsoft skills. Companies standardized on Microsoft software find that switching requires retraining entire workforces and converting decades of documents. Educational institutions teach Microsoft Office because employers expect Microsoft skills, creating a generational cycle where alternatives never gain adoption. It's systematic dependency creation disguised as professional development. Apple's systematic dependency operates through emotional and social psychology rather than just technical lock-in. iPhone users don't just depend on iOS, they depend on blue text messages that signal social status. iMessage creates artificial social hierarchies where green texts from Android users appear inferior and disrupt group conversations. Parents buy children iPhones not for features, but to prevent social exclusion. Apple has weaponized teenage peer pressure to enforce platform loyalty across generations. This brings us to the final and most disturbing principle, the legacy architecture of perpetual control, Rome, 1513. Pope Leo VI doesn't just want to control the Catholic Church during his lifetime. He wants to ensure that future popes follow precedents that cement Medici family influence permanently. He creates institutional structures, financial systems, and cultural norms that will outlive him by centuries. Leo understands that true princes don't just accumulate power, they build systems that generate power independently of their personal presence. Bill Gates achieved perpetual control through philanthropy that shapes global health policy, educational curricula, and agricultural development worldwide. The Gates Foundation doesn't just give away money. It creates dependencies among governments, NGOs, and academic institutions that make questioning Gates's priorities professionally dangerous. Countries that oppose Gates Foundation initiatives lose access to funding networks. Researchers who challenge Gates-sponsored studies find their career advancement blocked. It's systematic influence creation disguised as charitable giving. The sophistication of Gates' legacy architecture is that it appears altruistic while consolidating control over systems that affect billions of lives. Medieval popes were criticized for obvious corruption, but Gates is praised for generosity even as he shapes global policy in ways that benefit his business interests and ideological preferences. He's created a system where questioning his influence appears morally suspect because it means opposing apparent charity. Warren Buffett constructed legacy architecture through investment philosophy evangelism that has trained multiple generations of fund managers to think like Warren Buffett. Berkshire Hathaway annual meetings function as ideological reinforcement sessions where thousands of investors learn to evaluate companies using Buffett's criteria. Value investing disciples spread throughout finance, creating a cultural environment where Buffett's investment approach becomes standard practice. Even after Buffett dies, financial markets will operate according to principles he popularized. Elon Musk is attempting the most ambitious legacy, architecture in human history, positioning himself as the architect of humanity's technological future. Tesla doesn't just sell electric cars, it shapes transportation policy worldwide. SpaceX doesn't just launch rockets, it controls access to space commerce. Starlink doesn't just provide internet service, it creates dependency relationships with governments and populations worldwide. If Musk succeeds, future technological development will occur within frameworks he designed, making him potentially more influential than any corporate prince in history. The terrifying reality of legacy architecture is that it operates independently of accountability mechanisms. Democratic governments can be voted out of office, but corporate princes who successfully build legacy architectures influence policy and culture long after they lose direct control of their companies. They become permanent features of civilization rather than temporary business leaders, and they've learned to make their permanent influence appear beneficial rather than tyrannical. You now understand what business schools don't teach and corporate leaders never admit publicly. Modern capitalism isn't driven by innovation or competition. It's driven by systematic power accumulation using principles that Machiavelli codified 5 centuries ago. Every price you pay, every platform you use, every job that exists or disappears is shaped by corporate princes who view business as warfare and customers as resources to be harvested rather than served. But here's what I need to know. First, which of these corporate princes do you think poses the greatest threat to individual freedom, and why? Second, can you identify Machiavellian tactics being used by companies you currently work for or support with your money? Third, if you had the power to implement one of these principles in your own career or business, which would you choose and how would you execute it ethically? Share your thoughts in the comments. But remember, in a world governed by corporate princes, even opinions have consequences. The rabbit hole goes deeper than you imagine. My next investigation reveals how these same corporate princes collaborate with government agencies to surveil, influence, and control populations through methods that make historical totalitarian regimes look primitive. You need to understand psychological manipulation techniques used in modern marketing, the true relationship between big tech and intelligence agencies, and why whistleblowers who expose corporate corruption often pay the ultimate price. Subscribe to Machiavelli Code Official and never look at business and power the same way again.